Welcome to TrekTrav. I am Trav, and we're talking about the Three Spocks today. And we're talking about the TV show and movie Spocks. We're not talking about extended media Spocks. So sit back, like, comment, subscribe, and let's take a look at the three actors and the three different versions of Spock in Star Trek. Starting off with the newest version of Spock first, because there is no greater Spock than Leonard Nimoy, but there are some very good interpretations of this character. Ethan Peck, this guy, super sexy, very muscular, looks very different to Leonard Nimoy's version of Spock. And that's, I think, intentional. I agree. There's an episode where Lower Decks crosses over thing and they talk about how hot Spock is.
All right, I'm sorry, hold up. Look, I'm gonna keep this like 100% profesh, but I was thoroughly unprepared for how hot young Spock was going to be.
Yeah, he's full of surprises.
Like what? The body, the face, the ears, what?
Pretty damn hot. But Ethan Peck plays this character with integrity. There's always a respect for the things. You can feel that this version of Spock is more emotional and more human-like because this Spock is younger. He's less mature. He hasn't gone through as much as the Leonard Nimoy Spock later on. And if you watch TOS, the pilot, and also early season 1, Spock's character wasn't as defined. He had emotions, he had feelings. So Ethan Peck playing this more emotional, younger, more unsure of himself Spock is much more fascinating. He's also, he has trouble understanding his human side and also his Vulcan side, and they clash often. And I think that is what Ethan Peck brings to this role. I had trouble in the beginning. When Spock turned up with a beard, I was very much like, why is Spock turning up with a beard? But once he sort of got into it, I think Strange New Worlds did this more. I think Discovery Season 1, great, it was good to see Spock. But seeing him in Strange New Worlds, full Spockified, I think that he nailed the character. He has a nuance and an understanding. He has one of those things that's very important to Vulcans, which is the sort of, you can see emotions behind their eyes, but not necessarily expressed on their faces. If you want to see more references to that, you'd watch Paul from Enterprise, who does eye acting 10 times better than anyone else on that show. But Ethan Peck was certainly a breath of fresh air in Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Moving on to Zachary Quinto from the Star Trek Kelvin timeline films. This guy, I was apprehensive, and this is the first time in a long time it was the first time we had a newer version of Spock played by a different actor, and an actor who had to play against the original actor who made the role. And they look similar enough, although I did have issues because Leonard Nimoy is like mine, and Zachary Quinto has the joined earlobes like this. And yes, it's pedantic, but that bothered me. But Zachary Quinto plays similar to Ethan Peck, except in that Zachary Quinto had to mimic some of Leonard Nimoy's movements and behaviors because they were essentially playing the same character to a level. And having that pass on is easier if the characters are acting similar. Zachary Quinto did bring an emotional fragility and an almost slightly cooler Spock, a bit more, had the smart-assy lines and a bit more of a cool Spock than a nerdy, uncomfortable Spock. And in the timeline, it's sort of the same time as Ethan Peck, but they play very different versions of the character. Zachary Quinto is a great actor. You see him in Heroes, he plays a bad guy really well. You see him playing Spock in the Kelvin films, and I don't think anyone else could have acted with Leonard Nimoy so well without that blessing. Leonard Nimoy loved Zachary Quinto as a choice to play Spock. Leonard Nimoy had to approve who played him and very much guided him on his journey, and you see that throughout the 3 Kelvin films. But you see the growth of, this isn't exactly the same Spock. This isn't exactly the emotional depth or the emotional maturity that we had before. And it's interesting. It's really interesting to watch Zachary Quinto mimic that older Spock, but at the same time, because they're having different experiences, growing through that. And you don't see that really come to fruition until Star Trek Beyond. And now, Leonard Nimoy. Now, Leonard Nimoy is integral to the Spock character. As much as Gene Roddenberry created Spock, Leonard Nimoy created Spock. We're talking about the hand signal, we're talking about Vulcan tradition, Vulcan ways of doing things. Leonard Nimoy brought some of his own Jewish upbringing into the character of Spock. He brought his own sensitivities and his calmness and his sense of strength and also frustration with his own emotions. And then what you see over essentially 50 years of this character growing and changing is a character who goes from being sort of emotional to being very unemotional, but then letting his guards down and growing. Leonard Nimoy had 10 times as long as any of these other actors to actually get to where he was at in the Star Trek Kelvin films. And it's a huge juxtaposition. In the TOS pilot, The Cage, but also in early TOS, Spock is emotional and he grows to change. And as they molded the character, he became much more the Spock we knew. And then in the movies, Spock becomes sort of, he's pretty much confident in who he is until he dies, and then he has to rediscover himself. And in that, his relationship with Kirk and Bones grows. Once we enter the TNG episode Unifications Part 1 and Part 2, we see a Spock who has a goal and a plan and he's very keen on it. Spock also, according to a TNG episode, had children at this point. So he must have had a wife at this point. I wonder if it was T'Pring. But it was fantastic to see that growth. Now, when we get to the Kelvin timeline films and Leonard Nimoy pops up, the first thing you notice, and this is how great of an actor Leonard Nimoy is, the first thing you notice is that Spock is finally himself. He is complete. He has balanced the logical and the emotional. He has grown to that point. And it is an amazing thing to see. And if you don't like the Kelvin films, the one thing you can like is the Spock's final story. Especially in Star Trek 2009, where Spock comes in and he cleverly plays Spock and Kirk with each other, but he also is secure and comfortable and grown. And he has you can sense a love from him for Kirk and a love for the younger version of himself. That reminiscence of only an old man who's gone through everything can bring. Now, it is important to stress that Leonard Nimoy is Spock. They are very interlaced in the development, in the growth. Everything about Spock was a Leonard Nimoy creation, acting-wise. So when I look back to Zachary Quinto and Ethan Peck and Zachary Quinto, I had an iffy feeling. I don't like Zachary Quinto's relationship with Uhura, but that's gone by Star Trek Beyond. I don't really enjoy Ethan Peck's relationship with Chapel, although I enjoy seeing elements of it. And it makes more sense him being younger. And so these actors have taken everything that Leonard Nimoy gave while bringing the character to themselves. So always make you fall in love with those characters again. I think Zachary Quinto's performance as Spock was fantastic. I think Ethan Peck's current performance of Spock is fantastic. I think Leonard Nimoy, while it's still an acting job for him, he built, molded, grew the Spock character. Everything Spock is now started with Leonard Nimoy. Everything Spock was then was Leonard Nimoy. Gene Roddenberry just said, pointy-eared dude, and then came up with the unemotional stuff and discussed the character with Leonard Nimoy. It's very clear Leonard Nimoy is Spock. And it is fantastic to watch. If you thought Zachary Quinto wasn't great, I would highly disagree. If you don't think Ethan Peck is great, he is really good for the era that they are in. Leonard Nimoy wins, hands down, on the perfect Spock. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I have been TrekTrav. This has been the Three Spocks, and I will see you next time.